out there.
Yeah, this is pleasing to the eye, don't you say? Like, this is pleasing to the eye.
You're out
I
there.
mean, Yang Xiaohao would like a bit of this, right? I mean, yeah, there you go.
Well, there you go. It's better than Yang Chen Fu.
There you go, right? I mean, I'm sure Yang Xiaohao would like to have a bit of this.
So, Joey, go on then. What's the justification for the? If you don't mind me saying, the six pack's a bit high as well. It kind of almost goes up into the middle of your chest. What's the
I know. That's what internal training does to you. It's
right?
not a
Okay.
regular six pack, you see.
So, is this a result of your internal training?
Can you tell?
Yeah, yeah. It's either a result of your internal training or too much of that Diet Coke you're drinking, mate. One or the
Could be pizza too, apparently.
other. All right then. Fair enough. Well, how is life, Joey?
Life is good, man. Life is good. Been training hips actually.
Yeah, I see.
Been training hips and yeah, making. I would like to think that I'm making some progress.
On the sanity front, or
Oh, sanity front is like that's a lost cause. I mean, that ship has sailed.
okay. We won't worry about that then. We're just after internal skill, basically.
I mean, I got to survive in some way, right?
So you've been traveling all over the place, right? Where have you been since I last spoke to you?
I don't know, when did we last speak? Jeez, I can't even remember, man.
You did like a giant road trip visiting people, I think. You went all across Europe and
Yeah.
maybe maybe Canada, maybe America. I don't know. Where did you go?
Did we speak before? Ah, yeah, we spoke before that, didn't we? Yeah. So I was spending some time in Europe and Asia. So I spent some time in the UK with Rich Morley and Susanto Das, and doing some woo-woo silat stuff. And then I was in Barcelona hanging out with some Choga guys. It was
Right.
pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And then I was in Kofu for like a month hanging out with Adam and Rob Liberty.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Rob Liberty.
And
Yeah, I know who that is. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
and then in the Philippines, training with my Balintawak teacher.
Right.
And Taiwan with Richard Huang.
So what's with the Salat, the Filipino stuff and what have you? That's all new, right? Because I only ever know you doing Chinese arts, pretty much.
No, I've been I've been dabbling in Silat with Guru Mao Morni
Right. Okay.
and a couple of other people for, I don't know, like more than close to a decade now, I guess. But I mean, not dabbling, not really training properly and doing anything, but dabbling.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I met John in Marshall Camp earlier in the year,
Yeah.
and he sold me on Balintawak. So and then I went to the Russian camp in the Philippines, which is like a Filipino martial arts gathering that they do every year.
The Russian camp, is that what it's called?
It's basically run by a couple of like a bunch of Russian guys. So
Right.
or rather, it's actually a Russian house in the Philippines. Sorry, Alex would kill me for calling it Russian camp. No, it's a Russian house in the Philippines.
Right.
Like
I thought it was a version of the Marshall camp, but only for Russian people. I thought it was as a
it's not only for Russian people, but there is an inspiring story about like male bonding by building a house in the jungle in the Philippines, and I think that's kind of where the Russian house in the Philippines comes from.
yeah.
But yeah, I was attending that, and so that introduced me to a fair few Filipino martial arts legends, and I went back to train Balintawak with Grandmaster Danny Casio and his son R.R. Casio.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
So finally, I'm part of the family now.
I was impressed
Now
because
they have to put up with me.
I was impressed as well. Your stamina. You got back from that trip. You landed. I mean, that was a lot of flying you did, and then I saw you like an hour later in the gym or something crazy. You were posting already, like straight back in. You didn't come back and sleep or anything, no?
No rest for the wicked, mate.
Well, this is the main thing I want to ask you about. Really, is your gym stuff, the thing that has given you this Adonis-like physique that we see right here.
It's definitely the gym stuff for sure. I mean, in the sense that, like, I mean, it's all like traditional jib and gong type stuff, right? Like, I mean, it's not the what, it's the how, really. I mean, like my teacher Jimmy Hare, for example, he's been working with resistance, like, sort of since the day I met him, like since 2010 or whatever, right? So he has like stone locks and all kinds of resistance training gear in his living room. So
Okay.
it's very much part of the development of the internal art, the way he works through things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all Jib and Gong style stuff, really. Like, it's very much internal training.
So you happy
And
to explore it a bit with you? I've got a sort of number of questions I'd like to ask about it, if that's all right. Just to sort of, because I know roughly what you do, but just to kind of introduce people a bit more detail to the way that you do your strength training, if that's okay.
yeah, sure. I mean, you sure I'm pretty enough to talk about this type of thing?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I mean,
Pleasing enough to the
if with a man who's presented like so, clearly you're the man to come to.
Right.
Well,
That's right.
maybe that's the first way in. Maybe that's the first way in, because I've seen some of the stuff you do, and it's impressive, and it clearly, the manipulation of your body, the way you're using well, I'll let you explain it, but the insides of your body to essentially process the lifting, the weight, is clearly very good. And I've seen you do some stuff that produces a lot of power, but clearly, and no offense intended, is it doesn't change your body in the standard way that somebody would that was using the gym, right?
What do you mean? Look at this beauty right here. What are you talking about?
But well, anything I say beyond this point is undiplomatic, so I'll let you explore it. Is that, I just realized you're vaping, aren't you? What are you doing? Is that vaping?
Oh yeah, I stole Jay's vape. So
Come on, you can't vape, Joey. That's terrible. Smoke a real cigar. Get in trouble.
I mean, it's horrible. Like, I mean, I know it's horrible, but it has its advantages. So
I've never vaped. I don't know. It's. I presume vape is from vapor. It's like water vapor you're inhaling, is it?
it's not. It's some glycerol shit that really fucks up your lungs. I don't recommend it to anybody really.
No, that's
And it has a massive negative impact on your testosterone production too, by the way.
oh really?
Yeah, it does actually.
So you're not using this to help with your gym practice then?
Absolutely not. This is more of a getting in the character, like I'm a method actor, you see.
Right. Well, maybe before we explore the external stuff, or explore not the external, the strengthening. Maybe tell us, what do you mean by getting in character? What is this? Who is this character that we're looking at here? Sort of.
Well, I kind of modeled myself after a sexually liberated woman who walks the streets, to dazzle the world.
Right.
And my dietary habits and my little vices.
Right.
I mean, I don't think you can see the needle marks on my here. I don't think you can see the needle marks, but
so what?
And the motivation behind all this is that some Chinese sages have recently proclaimed that Yang Shaohao didn't want to teach anyone displeasing to the eye.
Right.
So I'm trying to be more pleasing to the eye in the hope that I can pick up a skill or two here and there.
So this is a protest against Yang Shaohao's teaching student choosing protocols.
Well, apparently, funny that apparently one of my friends who actually reads Chinese, which I don't,
right,
told me that it actually translates as someone that you don't like, not pleasing to the eye.
Right. Okay. Right.
But I mean, I think it's just that some translators, if anything is not a sex doll, it's not pleasing to their eyes, so they kind of translated and misquoted Yang Shaohao, as they seem to misquote many things. So,
okay.
It is what it is.
So I guess to put this into context for people watching this who won't know what this is about, Joey is referring to, I assume there's a quote by Yang Shaohao that is translated as something like "Don't take students that aren't pleasing to the eye." That's right? That's the quote, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct.
But it actually means don't, I don't know, trust your instincts to not teach someone who seems off. Is that what it's referring
Pretty
to?
much, don't teach dicks, basically. I think that's kind of what it boils down to,
Don't
really.
teach degenerates, I suppose, is the
Exactly.
right. Okay.
But interestingly, apparently Chen Wei-ming said that you shouldn't teach anyone who don't pay tuition either. So
What doesn't what? Sorry, who doesn't?
apparently Chen Wei-ming said don't teach anyone who doesn't pay tuition either.
Doesn't pay tuition.
So
It's a very important Tai Chi classical rule.
it's a very important thing, apparently. So that was also shared by the same sage as well. So I'm guessing that's equally important. So I was trying to basically find a stack of cash and just, make it rain. But I don't have a stack of cash at the moment. So Australia is very anti-cash these days.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's digital country, right? Prison planet.
That's right.
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's a few things that you're protesting in the Tai Chi world right now, or at least in the, I guess, kind of Western Tai Chi community. It's probably fair to say.
So I don't know. I don't really call it a protest as much as fundamentally I don't give a shit, right?
Well,
But
one of your most endearing qualities, I think, actually.
so it's kind of I'd like to think of it as like I can either be depressed about it or just laugh about it and take the piss. So I take the latter approach.
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, I get it. So what do you think then in general? What do you think? We'll leave the I guess Gong Li, I suppose we could call it for the time being. We'll leave the strength training if that's what maybe you have a different term for it, but maybe then so what is the state of the Western Tai Chi world right now, in your opinion, Joey? Since clearly
I don't
feel strongly enough about it to be stood there in a man bra vaping away with your six-pack out.
Beautiful. It makes me look beautiful. It accentuates all my features. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know if the Tai Chi scene today is any different from what it has always been, in the sense that I don't think the highest level Tai Chi skills were ever all that common.
No, yeah.
And I think that, just like today, a lot of people used to bitch a lot, make up shit and all these things, right? You look at the quality of the things that have been published and all the things that are going on, you can kind of infer that it was a smaller, less voluminous version of what's happening today, right?
Yeah, sure.
So I think it's just that more people and more agendas involved today by the sheer number of people who claim to be doing it, rather than back in the day, which was much smaller number, obviously. See, Dr. Dre agrees, right? He's like, yeah, baby, that's right. That's my man. That's my boy. Yeah, I got it. So, right on, Dre. You got it, man. So
Dr. Dre is his
basically,
cat, by the way. He hasn't got Dr. Dre tied up in a chair off the camera.
oh, do I now? So, so yeah, generally, I mean, I see two camps, right? So there's the one camp that want to believe, right, in the sense that all the pie in the sky, airy fairy hippies who just want to believe, right? There's that aspect of it. And these guys don't want to lift a finger, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's certainly that crowd who eventually talk about like quantum healing and, like magic hands and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the other 1/3, maybe a little less, who are obsessed about basically beating people up, for the lack of a better word. Or at least some way they want to feel physically powerful, so they create this delusion that internal martial arts are just about basically running around, banging your head on everything, and just it's like they basically think it's just another form of just mindless doing,
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And the funny thing is that those people seem to practice a bit more than the previous group, who seem to be practicing more about arguing online than the other way around, right? So
yeah, so at least the ones who, want to go around and just sort of build power in a conventional way or whatever, at least they're training hard, you're implying, right?
That's right. I mean, at least they're training, whereas a lot of the philosopher crowd or want to believe crowd
yes,
tend to ruminate most of the time than doing anything else, it seems, right? And at the intersection of these two things, I think, is where the real practice happens, where people are obviously mindful about what the hell they're doing, but also they're not shy to train.
right. Okay.
And within this small group, I think is where all the progress is happening, because the haters on the physical side, you see them like after 15 years, they're still basically running around the same circle. Whereas, the want to believe crowd, they are on the same circle too, perhaps floating, not running, That's the only difference.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
So then you have all these people who basically want to define these arts based on their level of incompetence for monetary reasons or fame, feeling secure. I don't know, whatever that may be, right? I mean, whatever their broken piece that they want to fix, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So, which is fine. I mean, they're all human, right? We're all human. But the issue that I have is that I owe it to the ancestors who developed and advanced these arts, and literally, right, during the Cultural Revolution and all these things, right? I mean, they went through blood, sweat, and tears to preserve these things for us, right? And so we have some obligation. I have an obligation to my teachers and their teachers going up the generations, and the Chinese culture in general, because it was the Chinese culture through thousands of years of development that gave rise to these ways of worldviews and these arts as its culmination, right?
Yep.
So I think I owe it to that heritage to actually at least try to preserve some of this for the future, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And the problem is that, like, these are conversations that Adam and I've had many times. So one of the key differences today is that people basically equate the availability of information to accessibility of knowledge. They're not the same thing, though. That's the thing. Like, there's a lot of information, but a lot of it is noise. A lot of it is deliberate misinformation.
You think deliberate,
So
not accidental?
a lot of it is deliberate misinformation, because a lot of these teachers, they make shit up to justify their incompetence or their ignorance or their lack of knowledge, right?
Oh, I get it. Right.
So,
So not deliberate okay, I understand. So it's not deliberate misinformation to deliberately fool people away from the real stuff, but deliberate misinformation as in the person who made it up knew they made it up and it wasn't true.
a lot of it is that. I mean, back in the day,
yeah.
Back in the day, there seemed to have been more deliberate misinformation of the kind you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because, they didn't want their bread and butter to be like spread around and just, break their rice bowl, right?
Sure.
But today, it's like a more of a voyeuristic and exhibitionist culture where they want to put stuff out there to look important, but what they're putting out is misinformation and noise that justifies their incompetence, right?
Right.
Now, the problem is that if the information wasn't available, people will keep seeking it.
Yeah.
And hopefully, eventually at some point, they will get around to a genuine source, right? But the problem right now is that there's so much noise and misinformation out there that when people hear these things or see these things, they believe that's the truth. They believe that's what it's about, because that's how it's presented, right? This is my lineage transmission, not something that I wrote on the back of my toilet paper when sitting in the throne in the morning, right? So,
yes.
but a lot of it is, right? So, what happens is that people come across this information and they believe that they have the real thing, and they stop looking, right? So there's like decades down the tubes, chasing windmills.
Sure. Okay.
And I think that that's a horrible thing to do to people, to basically like basically get people or seduce people or coerce people or deceive people to put decades of their attention and practice and diligence down the tubes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just so that you can get a bit more money or you can feel good about yourself.
Sure.
I
Okay.
think that's a horrible thing to do. Because at the end of the day in life, right?
Yeah.
All we have is time and we have so little of it. You know what I mean? So I'm not a huge fan of wasting other people's time.
I get it. So I actually, with what you're saying there, the way you're describing, I guess, deliberate errors, as you say it, like the way you're using it there, I can definitely see parallels in the world that I'm more familiar with, which is the Qigong or Neigong world for sure. But maybe without making it personal or whatever, maybe you could give an example of something in the Tai Chi world that you feel, is it easy to do that off the top of your head, or would you have to think about it?
Oh, I mean, yeah, like because like pretty much everything is that, right?
Oh, all
I
right.
mean, you know, like
Fair enough.
so like a very simple thing that is often translated as, you know, like raise the back and hold the chest to empty the chest, right?
Can you
Like
say
this is,
raise the back and hold up the?
I mean, when you translate it as raise the back and follow the chest, right? Which is a statement, like I think it's one of the points that Yang Cheng Fu published,
Sure.
right? And I mean, this is a very important part of the internal practice, especially how it relates to the spiritual aspect of the art, right?
Okay.
And this is like a physical side effect of connecting with some of the higher things. And, you know, like basically, for example, it's about raising the spirit and all this other stuff, right?
Yes.
So it is a very, very important thing. And the problem is that when you basically reduce it to all these like physical things like curving your chest like this, or like trying to raise your back like this and like puff up like a cobra, right? All these things are very physically. Yeah, apparently.
Right.
Because, you know, because most people push linearly. So if you push linearly and curve the back, right,
Yes.
there's a lateral movement as well and power at the same time. So it makes the average numpty have a bit of a hard time dealing with the push.
Sure, because you turn the straight.
So this is being pushed as the authentic method because it works on numpties, right? So what they do is that they basically try to do like, you know, like engulfing you with cheese, right?
Okay.
And now the problem with this is that the way they pull the spine up or try to pull the spine up, like a lot of chi is being raised up here, right? Making the people anxious as fuck. And if it goes to the head, you know what's going to happen, right?
Nothing
so
good.
It's a horrible thing. And, you know, like when you do that, also you got someone who can put a bit of force onto you and it's not a numpty, like your Mingmen is going to get locked, right? And you're going to have problems.
Sure.
So these things are not only like time wasters, they're actually quite dangerous, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But
go on. Sorry. Go on.
But they do produce quick results, right?
But they will within I guess they will within a very set collection of parameters, I suppose. Like if two people are doing a very set pattern with each other, they can do something, right?
Well, I mean, if they're working on a very set pattern, they can safely do it, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not getting in the way of each other. Right? Or, I mean, you're basically repeating the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's crazy, right? Like, so for example, right, without naming names, you know, because you're more polite than I am,
sure.
Say that you're at a workshop, right? And you want to, you know.
Should I tell you why I'm more polite before we go on, Joey? I'll tell you why. Every time, I don't mind what people say, but every time I've had somebody on these podcasts and I've been chatting with them, whatever they've said, I've got the blame for. It's unbelievable. There was one podcast today, bro.
It is your bad influence because you reach out to me through your astral body in the etheric realm and compelled me to wear this for you.
I did.
So it is your subconscious desire that is wanting me to dress like this.
It was. It was a very strong desire I was completely unconscious of, but now it's presented before me.
There you go. Well, you know what they say, right? You know, you make your bed, you lay on it. So now you have to put up with the repercussions of your desire.
I'm getting used to it now. It'd be weird seeing you any other way, to be honest. I hope this is going to be a
fair enough. I'll have to disappoint you next time because it's uncomfortable as fuck, you know? But anyway.
There was one
I
podcast
digress.
that was like 2 hours, and all I did was sit there and listen to somebody share their views on Buddhism on a topic I didn't know about, a particular branch of Buddhism, and the amount of abuse I got afterwards for my views on Buddhism. Like, hang on a minute, look which one of us is talking. So that I've realized I'm tarred with the same brush, Joey. So now they're going to call me a drag queen who vapes and
Hey, maybe you're still queen.
Sure.
So yeah, anyway, but I can't even forget what we're talking about.
Sorry. Set parameters.
So anyway, like say, for example, if I was at a workshop, right?
Yes.
And if I wanted to impress some numpties,
yes,
right, and if I basically progressively drove them towards presenting me a very strict structure like this, right?
Yeah.
To hold me up, right?
Yeah.
And then I put my hands on it, on them, and teach other people to expand their back like a cobra, so they can move people around, like the sexy body and everything, right?
Yes.
Like it works, right? It's like it's a very seductive cooperative environment where people who have had decades of practice without any results can very easily fall into that seductive trap of a, it's like an old, sleazy old car salesman tactic, right?
Sure.
So, half a day workshop, people are coming around, like, floating people, throwing people, everyone's happy, except it's complete and utter bullshit, right?
Sure, especially because I guess even if you were going to base your skill on that, even if you could say you could refine that to a very high level, because it's not actually based on anything internal at all, really. It's just going to glass ceiling very soon, isn't it, with regards to its growth?
Absolutely. I mean, all you're doing is that you're basically using the extensors on your back a little bit more than the average person. And the conditioning that you're conditioned into as a part of the training and learning that makes you stiffen your yaw, right? And stiffen your abdomen, like basically you hold it up like this, right?
Yeah.
That creates the condition for it to actually work.
Sure.
Right? So it's crazy that all these people can't see it. Sure. It's basically what they're training is creating the condition that is fertile for it to work on you, right?
Yeah. Well,
zero problems with collective delusion, but there's two things, right? The first thing is that if they go and do that against someone who can put some weight on them, or put some force on them, like a good wrestler, right? Or a judo guy or something like that, right? They're going to be in trouble. Like they're going to get hurt, right? And the other thing is that all the energetic things that it's doing in your body, like constantly being like this, right? Like this, and all the things being stuck up here, and like you do it long enough, it's going to end up making you like a dickhead, basically, right?
You mean your character?
Yeah, because this thing, right? These practices, I mean, people think that they're transformative in a positive sense, but they're also transformative in a negative sense. Like if you do it wrong, it can seriously screw you up, right? Like it's like all the Qigong deviation stuff, right? I mean, it's not too far off, really.
No, yeah, I get it, yeah.
So there's that aspect on top of sullying the art and destroying it for the future generations by defining it to be bullshit.
Okay.
And this is where the problem is, really.
So maybe you should maybe you could define for us your understanding of raising the back and emptying the chest, as you see it. Because I presume it's a thing that happens there can be various stages of understanding, I guess. But how would you understand it where you are right now?
Well, this is the thing, right? I mean, there's through the different stages of development, as you keep defining your zhongding or eccentric equilibrium and your swinging formula, right? As you go on doing it, refine it changes a lot, right?
You know, I'm going to pull you up on those terms in a minute, though, and I'll need you to define those ones as well, because there's lots of people who watch this, and not all of them are 100% familiar with the way that zhongding would be defined. So be careful of your terms.
Again, that's one thing, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of authentic traditions who define zhongding in slightly different ways, but fundamentally, they're all aspects or facets of the same phenomenon, right? So, which is not a problem, right? I mean, you look at an elephant from any facet, it's still an elephant, right? Which is okay.
Yeah.
But then when you go and try to take a dead mouse and pretend it's an elephant,
Yeah.
That's when the problems start, right?
Yep.
But uh, but anyway, so there's a lot of different stages that you go through. But fundamentally, from an energetic point of view, that whatever the changes that happen in your thoracic spine and your upper spine, right, and the orientation of your head, the occiput and all the other stuff, right, and in the thoracic cavity itself, right, they should all be results of the process of purifying or raising the spirit.
Yep.
And that relationship of that process to the crown, right, which is not really the physical crown per se, but that process, right? So if you're doing anything that cuts you off from that process, right, that defeats the purpose entirely.
Right. So contriving you're saying basically a contriving a raising of the spine and a hollowing of the chest by curving and spreading the upper back sort of forcefully is going to actually prevent you from being able to raise the energy to the crown, the spirit to the crown in the right way.
Exactly.
Okay.
And doesn't matter which stage of it you're in and what physical manifestation, for the lack of a better word, of it that you're going to experience, but it should not be contrived. It should be resultant aspect of the fundamental underlying thing that is happening, which is basically raising a spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but once when it gets reduced to some kind of like acrobatics of your upper body that prevent, like you end up going like this, right? Like, right? You end up doing that, right? Then you basically cut yourself off from any progress you're going to have in this art.
Sure.
Because you're now cut off from being able to do anything with your spirit.
Okay, cool. So maybe then, maybe the issue would be then that maybe teachers that are doing that or practitioners that are doing it just thinking and don't even believe that refinement of spirit is a possible thing or an actual thing.
Well, I mean, if they're defining it by their level of incompetence, you look at their characters, I mean, you can clearly see that there's no refining of the spirit involved there. So, you put two and two together, it's pretty easy to figure out, what's going on, right?
You mean sort of moral character of the person and things like this, or?
Well, how they interact with the world and life that animates around them, right? Like, you basically can very easily see, like, if you're running around lying and, slandering people behind their backs.
Sure.
And engaging in sexual misconduct and that compulsion to not be able to control yourself, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Compulsion to, well, I mean, if I say this, a lot of teachers are going to hate me because apparently it's very prevalent in this world.
What is?
But if you go and try to sexually exploit your students, for example, right?
Yeah.
Clearly not a sign of raising the spirit.
Sure. Okay. Yep. Yeah.
So I mean,
the point,
it's pretty easy to see, really.
The point is driven home extra hard when you're stood there. Present.
But I can't compete with Tifa the sex doll. So what can I do?
I feel so
exploited
right? Just chatting with you, mate.
Just remember, it is your unconscious desire manifesting all this.
Well, in which case I need to raise my spirit.
Yes.
To raise it. So we'll go back to Zhongding. There's an important one.
By the way, before we move on, if you want to raise your spirit, make sure you pay your tuition.
I will do. I think over the years I've paid a lot of tuition, so I should be okay. I bet I've paid more tuition than the vast majority of people. So yeah, totally. I should be fine. So I'm going to take you back to Zhongding because Joey, you have this habit. You have this habit. I have to pull you up on it. My job is to pull you up on such things. I've read a lot of your posts and I've chatted with you and I've seen things you've written and seen your videos on YouTube as well, which do have an excellent intro that has become something that means I can't watch your videos before I get to sleep because that fucking song gets stuck in my head while I'm trying to doze off. So I can't watch anything of yours for at least 2 to 3 hours before I sleep. Who is it? Is it? I don't even know who sings that. Is it Missy Elliott or somebody?
No, it might be Missy Elliott actually.
I think it's that, but it fucking sucks. But anyway, I watched.
You know how that came about, right? Like basically, I recorded a bit of form in Mexico. Like I don't know, like
yep.
I think it's earlier this year, or like maybe it was last year, right? Well, I think it was earlier this year, like at Jay's brother's wedding. I just was doing something on the beach, and I was just, going through like whatever that came up, and that music was suggested, and I went with it. And everyone was commenting about it. I'm like, okay, fine, vox populi, vox die, right? I mean, voice of people, voice of God. There you go.
I'd rather listen to that than Chinese flute, to be honest, I suppose. But I've seen you mention it, and I've seen you discussing principles, and there's very rarely anything that I would either disagree with, definitely not, and sometimes you speak about things that are beyond my understanding anyway. So my logic is when you speak about it and it's out of my realm of experience, but I think, well, everything else I agree with. So therefore, there's a validity to what you're doing. I think that gives it an authenticity to your practice, and your practice is, I think, to people who have the eyes to see, is pretty impressive. The work you're doing inside and the way you move it and everything. But you do use terms that hardly anyone understands, and you talk about them as if people understand. And there's a few of them, and I already know what your definition is of zhongding, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't get you to explain it from your point of view, simply because it's kind of fundamental to Tai Chi, right?
It is. And I fully agree. I do that. And this is why I don't get the ladies. So it's a long-standing problem, right? I mean,
you've got
if
a
I
lady.
did get the ladies, I'd be having illicit children all around the town, right?
What do you mean,
so
don't get the ladies? You have got a lady.
I know, that's right. That's the one, right? I don't have illicit children all around the town, but apparently my manhood is not good enough for that. So there you go,
Right.
But it might not be the manhood. It might just be the way I talk, the way I explain things.
You're not a high value male enough. That's the problem.
But that's the problem. I mean, I keep trying to say like nice shoes wanna fuck, but that doesn't really go anywhere.
Oh dear. Never mind. So what? Maybe if you explain zhongding, it'll increase your, what's the phrase?
Impress ladies.
Sexual marketplace value.
Okay. Any impressing of the ladies that's going to happen is going to be a side effect. So it's not the intention. I'm just like putting it out there, right?
Is Jay there?
Yeah, just there.
Oh, right. Okay. Say hello. Oh, she could hear me. Hello.
She was giving me fashion tips.
Right. Okay.
She was telling me that I should accentuate my nipples. So there you go.
I hope you use some ice cubes. Yeah.
No, it's pretty cool enough here at the moment. So
okay.
It's so natural.
Zhongding.
So natural.
Zhongding. I can't get into a conversation on your nipples, Joey. It's indecent.
So in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
In a nutshell, zhongding would be the target state that you're striving to achieve or maintain by letting go, surrendering, offering, all that other stuff, right? It's as simple as that. So zhongding is the common set of conditions that exist throughout your entire operation as a Taiji animal or Taiji creature.
Right. Okay.
So those are the things that is the thing that does not change. Those are the relationships that stay related.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they are variable, malleable, but they stay related. So a better word that I like to use is the harmonies, right? It's a collection of harmonies that remain harmonized throughout your entire operation of a Taiji creature at the level you're working on, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The refinement of this is the entire art. So and the way you refine this is by letting go further and further and surrendering more and more and more, using the prescription that is prescribed to you, right? Because, so this is something that means a lot in bodywork as well, right? Now, oftentimes we say let go, we say release, right? But you don't know what target configuration you're supposed to get to. Like if you let go, I'll basically inject some GHB and go on the ground like a sack of potatoes and stay there in a puddle, right?
Sure.
So there has to be something that we're maintaining that allows us to maintain posture, balance, and generate power in the right way. There has to be some relationships within the body that stay active and alive as we constantly let go, right?
And these are the qualities you're harmonizing, right?
That's right. And zhongding is that collection of qualities that you're harmonizing that remains while you let go everything else.
Sure, that makes
Now,
sense.
depending on the particular physical method, at whatever stage you're working on, right, and your mental proclivities and your mental transformation, raising of the spirit and all that other stuff, it changes over time. But functionally, the architecture of it, the place of it in the overall picture is still the same.
Sure. Okay.
Now, some traditions like to have this idea of the central channel or the central line or whatever it might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is not wrong, right? At that level, it is not wrong, right? And at a higher level, there is something beyond zhongding, which is more of a spiritual harmony which you offer yourself to and become a part of, right? That pervades your entire existence, right? I think it's called zhongji or zhonghe or something like that, right?
Yep.
So zhongding, like some traditions make that differentiation. Like there's zhongding, which is a bit more physical, and then there's all the spiritual stuff with the zhongji, right? So all these things do exist, but fundamentally, it is that thing that remains as you let go of everything else.
Here's your cat. Dr. Dragon,
Yeah, you.
away.
I think you might get a good vantage point, but that he might by giving you, honey bunny, you got to go. Come here. All right, Dr. Rai.
So maybe
Even serial killers love their pets.
Say again?
Apparently, even serial killers love their pets.
Who does?
Apparently, even serial killers are known to love their pets.
Right. Okay. That's very reassuring.
So I have to train him kung fu because, some of my haters might come after him. Like something I love, kind of thing.
Right. Okay. Sure. I'm sure.
This is kind of the excuse that I use with Jay, so that she'll be motivated to train.
Right. It's okay. Well,
make it existential,
Yes. What does Jay make of your look?
Jay was a consultant on this look,
right?
So
okay.
she's the one who came up with like hairpins. Beautiful.
I couldn't see that. You've got hairpins in. I didn't know.
It's got a bling bling hairpin here, beautiful,
Yep.
like diamonds in the sky kind of thing.
Okay, cool. Well, next time I'll come in drag. The next time I chat with you, so it's fair. Yeah.
So basically, she was trying to get this sort of like a blingy earrings because she thought they would be plain. My Buddha ears, they're not really doing the job. So unfortunately, I don't have piercing. So it kind of sucks. But for next time,
is this what you guys do in the evening? Is this how you entertain yourselves at night, you guys?
No, this is the first time actually, and I think we might get into it. Really.
Okay.
I mean, look at this.
I can see the appeal. I can. So maybe give us some examples of things that harmonize then, Mage. What are the harmony? Because what are the parameters that must stay in place when you release? If you're new, say you're new, you're a beginner, not at the level of harmonizing with the divine.
So if you're a beginner, right?
Yeah.
So there are two ways to go about this, right?
Yeah.
So some approach it from a purely physical approach in terms of proprioception, right? So what they do is that they define certain parameters or ranges of movement and relationships. Like the saying that elbows are harmonized with the knees and ankles with the wrists and all these things, right?
Yep.
So you can come at it from a proprioceptive physical side.
Yeah.
For an absolute beginner in how they place themselves in space, right? You maintain that, and as you maintain it, you introspect and recognize some of the inner conditions that are present when you're operating within those physical parameters.
Which is very akin to how I teach it, actually. It's more like that for beginners when I do
it. I think that might be the only way for beginners, for the simple reason that they have to cross that bridge in terms of getting in touch with their physical coordination, their proprioceptive positioning of their bodies in space,
Yes. Yeah.
So it is very much the traditional way of doing it, because if you go all interoceptive on people, they don't really understand, they don't really have those integrated perceptions that people are talking about, right? Like for example, of just say for example, to say like disperse your yi at a certain level of your spine.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell does it even mean, right? People don't actually have that perception. So the physical parameters are very important. And now tying this back to some of the resistance training work I do,
Yeah.
most people, when they get into it, their internal structures, the substrate, is neither strong or open enough to maintain those parameters, the physical parameters, let alone the interoceptive relationships.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is why it's important. This is why the Gongli aspect of the Jimen Gong exists, right? This is why you do hard physical work, and this is why people who have good external kung fu excel at internal arts when they get around to it, because they have a strong substrate, they have awareness of their physical bodies, so it's easier for them to maintain these parameters and recognize the inner conditions that give rise to these outer conditions.
Okay.
So what you do is you put these outer conditions together, you maintain it, and then you go inwards and you recognize the inner conditions that are creating these outer conditions.
Sure.
And then you work with refining these inner conditions. So after a certain stage, you don't really care too much about the outer conditions, because the outer conditions become a manifestation of the inner conditions, right? So this is what they talk about in inner and outer harmony, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's bloody spelled out right there, right?
It's
like it's not about wearing those Chinese pajamas when you're doing Tai Chi. That's not the inner and outer harmony we're talking about.
There's no way that you can mock people's outfits right now.
I don't know, man. I've heard teachers say, like, this is sandal power, right?
This
so
is
I don't know.
pajama. Well, they don't think it's a literal thing, right?
I mean, who knows? Like, I mean, they pin their feet to the ground like a pumpkin on toothpicks. So I mean, I guess at some level they do. I don't know. Like, it's funny because dantian has become a bad word in some communities in the internal arts. Can you believe that?
Sorry?
Dantian has become a dirty word in some of these internal arts communities, which is quite hilarious.
Yeah, sure, yes.
But apparently it's how these uneducated farmers who develop these arts explain just breathing to your belly, apparently.
Right. Yeah.
I've been told that. So what do I know, right? I mean, I'm not a lineage holder, so what do I know?
It's the same in the Qigong world and the alchemy world, which is even stranger, I think, personally. I mean, the dantian should be even more prevalent within the Qigong world than it should be in Tai Chi, arguably, right?
But I mean, to be fair though, there's nothing wrong about like tying copper wire around your ball sack and burying it in the ground, right? I mean, like that sounds like a very reasonable thing to do.
Do you know? Yes, I actually showed this. I took the Facebook groups and the forums where people are tying copper wires to their perineum and their nether regions and sticking them in the wall. I actually showed them to some of the lineage holders in the Negong traditions and allowed them to read the groups, and they thought it was hilarious. And I desperately wanted to film for YouTube their reactions to reading what people are doing. But they wouldn't let me, actually. But it would have been funny. But I tried to tell them as well. I tried to tell the people who are plugging copper wires into their perineum. I actually sent some of them a message, people I know, saying, please, they think it's hilarious, the heads of the schools that have the skills you're trying to recreate. But people didn't believe me. So what can you do? I'll leave them to their copper wires.
But I mean, to be fair, though, like, I mean, there is an age-old practice of like standing on those little glass marbles, like putting them under your bubbling well and sitting on it on your perineum, so you actually have some physical sensation of the bloody place. I mean, there is that.
There's also a jade butt plug that was used by some practitioners as well. So just because something is old, I'm not sure that makes it valid.
You gotta be careful saying those things, because one of these lineage holders might take it and say the internal power comes from the jade butt plug up the spine, right? I mean,
Sure, they'll do that behind closed doors. So there was an interesting thing you said there. I might take you back a little bit, if that's all right. You said that most people, I'm probably going to misquote you, so I apologize to correct me. But you said most people don't have the strength to maintain the conditions when they release. Is that right? As zhongding goes deeper, was that the implication, or?
That is my experience, right? I mean, the easiest way to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Is that, when we learn to move and affect the world around us as toddlers, right?
Yeah.
There's something that in neuroscience we call over-specialization, and that's a term that's used in machine learning as well. So what happens is that you have all these possibilities. So based on your actual interaction with the task at hand, you narrow down these possibilities really quickly, and then you rely on these possibilities for the rest of your life, more or less, right?
Okay.
So
yeah,
what this does is that this reduces a lot of those possibilities you would have had earlier on, but at least now you're functional, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So in the conventional way of movement, especially because we are so sedentary these days and we have a very limited range of movements, we don't swing from branch to branch on the trees, or we don't run barefoot through the mountains, and we don't do any of that stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So our range of movement is very limited. So we over specialize into generating power and moving in a very specific way, right? Now,
yeah, I get that. Yeah.
And when you apply that to hard physical work with a limited range of function, what happens is that all those things consolidate to generate more power within those limited parameters.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't do resistance training until you have enough skill letting go.
Yeah.
Right? And maintaining some harmonies, or you're doing it prior to internal training in the first place to develop the internal substrate, right? The body and the mind, right? Because mind is important, because you need skills like perseverance, right? I mean, you need to have the skill of fucking practicing, for crying out loud, right?
Sure.
So, and discipline and all the other stuff. So anyway, so what happens is when you let go of this consolidated substrate, right? You start unlocking variations within this, right? So now, outside of this robotic consolidated pattern that you are used to, you start opening variation within it, right? Now, the trick is, the more range that you get, the more changes that you can make, the more variability you have, you start losing that consolidation. Things start separating.
I get you.
And adjusting to each other in subtle ways, right? But the problem is when these things separate under certain ranges of motion, they're simply not strong enough or powerful enough to do what it needs to be done, right?
Right. Okay. Yes.
So this is where I see the body opening and the zhongding process of the internal arts coming in, so that you actually strengthen the pipe for the qi, and strengthen the substrate, which is the pipes, to be able to push qi through in these all different circuits to get things done in more subtle and complex ways, right?
So for people who don't know, zhongding, Joey's talking about sinew changing. Carry on.
So technically speaking, when you let go, you actually have to be stronger, because the components that are in use now, because other stuff is letting go, have to actually be stronger. They have to be more robust.
Sure, yeah.
They actually have to be able to pump qi through it to a much bigger degree, because now they're not consolidated into this robotic stream of work, right?
Yep, I get it.
So this is why when people let go in standing, right, it hurts like hell.
Yes.
It's not,
to say the least.
It's not a pleasant process.
No, definitely. Well, I don't know, actually. I never had a problem with it because I quite enjoy pain. So it was actually quite an enjoyable process for me. So I never had that issue, but most people seem to hate it.
I was about to say you're British, so, that's like walking the park for you.
Yeah, totally. It was like, that's the worst. It hurts. All right, okay. So standing was all right.
Bring more. So yeah, my favorite teacher always used to say that, if you're not basically curled up on the ground in fetal position and crying for your mummy after, few minutes of practice, you're not doing it right. Right?
Well, to be fair, some of my students are curled up on a fetal position, crying on the floor before they even join the school. Actually, sometimes we're working through some issues.
Well, at least they're training themselves for what's coming, right?
True.
You can never start too early.
So this is like what you as well. I hope you don't mind me just keep taking you back and pulling something apart. I hope that's all right, Joey.
No worries at all.
Okay.
Like, at an earlier time, I used to dress like a normal human being too. So, I'd like to go back to that.
That's never true. Definitely, that's definitely not. You dress more decently. No, I like to take you back because I think a lot of what you're saying, like I'm trying to just pull you back and look at it from someone else's point of view because I know what you're saying and I understand but I'm not sure that everybody listening to this will because I'm aware that as much as anything, I'd like this conversation and your knowledge, which is very high, to be useful for beginners. So sometimes I just want to pull the obvious out you, which is you said about like the timing for resistance training, which might sound blatantly obvious, but maybe you could explain those stages because you said that someone should do resistance training prior to internal work was one way of doing it. And then they shouldn't do resistance training again, if you like, once their body is already strong until they had what? What would they need if they're in Tai Chi? When to return to resistance training?
So when you want to return to resistance training,
yeah,
is when you have enough chi in your body, right? And enough opening in your body to work with the resistance in the way you carry your body around. Because your body is resistant, right? Resistance, right?
Yes.
So you support your body in a certain way, depending on which stage you're in, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing your internal work, right? So you should be able to apply that to the resistance in the same way. You don't go and do something else completely different. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So you don't basically you don't go and basically try to maximize for vanity muscle group hypertrophy while you're doing internal training. You should be doing it the way you're internal training, right? And this is the reason with all the volume of work that I'm putting in this, why my body is beautiful like this and unconventionally beautiful, because it just doesn't work on the body the same way, right?
Sure. Yes. So what's the difference? Why does it work differently on the body? What is because it produces an outcome, but it's not the standard bodybuilding outcome.
So one of my friends from a Systema background, he likes to call it the labor strength, right?
The what strength?
It's basically, we call it laborer strength, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at a lot of laborers, right, they're thick. They have thick bodies, but they're not beautifully defined bodies that you want to drop your skirts for, right?
Not usually, no.
Not usually. I mean, it could be, but not usually, right?
Yeah.
So because basically in resistance, when you're doing resistance training with any modality that integrates your body in a way that disperses the forces across all your substrate and generates power from release using either viscosity of your body or the elasticity of your body, right? When you're operating that modality, everything becomes a whole body exercise. You curl a dumbbell, it's working on the whole body, right?
Sure.
So Jay was doing a cable press down today, and she was complaining that her quadriceps are hurting and some tiny muscles in her ankles are hurting, right? Sure. But that's what it is. That's what internal training is. It's not your triceps that's going to take all the brunt of it, right? Because your body is no longer a platform with a crane attached to it where the crane is doing all the work.
Yes.
Now your whole body is the crane, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So this is why, so when you're doing the internal modality, no matter which particular technology you're using, is a whole integrated body affair where the load is distributed across the entire substrate, and it gives you the possibility to modulate that entire substrate. It gives you the degrees of freedom of that entire substrate within the harmonies that you're maintaining.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
So this is why you can do very subtle things while you're generating power, right?
Sure.
I mean, you can be applying power straight, but apply to a person so that they're moving laterally, right? So
yeah, I get it.
So this is the thing. So this is why these training modalities are very different. If
Sure.
you're not trying to go for hypertrophy of what is so-called vanity muscles, we are trying to apply the internal training process to work with resistance just the way we work with body weight, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so in order to do that, you have to have a good degree of being able to let go, both mentally and physically, so that you can remain within the conditions of the zhongding that you're training.
Sure. Yeah.
So basically, that's kind of what it is. Like, if you can't generate the necessary conditions to first float the resistance, as in like support the resistance with the yin aspect of your structure, right?
Yep.
And then at a later stage, I mean, you don't have to do that, right? You can use the morphology of the yin structure to move the weights, which actually strengthens the yin aspect of the body. But at a later stage, you basically let the weight be supported by the yin aspect, and then you use the yin path, like the heart path, as some call it, and other stuff, right? To actually mobilize it, right?
Oh.
So at a higher level of resistance training, you have to have that clear yin and yang separation of the zhongding for it to work. But when you're beginning the resistance work the internal way, you're focusing more on the yin aspect of zhongding and letting things open up, letting things stretch, let the duila expand itself and reinforce itself, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, so in a nutshell, to recap, you can only approach resistance training with the internal method when you're in a position where you can comfortably support your own body using that internal method.
Yes.
And then in addition to that, you start supporting external loads using the same method. If you're doing something else, that's not the right thing.
It's why you have to start with such tiny weights, right? When you start to lift weights.
Absolutely right.
Because it's certainly even anything almost beyond a tin of beans when you first start, it almost throws everything out, right? It doesn't look very.
Yeah, but this is why you start without weights, right? You start without resistance, and then you start adding resistance as you get better, right?
Mm.
And you know, the mental component is a large part of this. Like, a lot of the problem that people have is not the actual load, but it's also the discernment of the mind to let go precisely enough to operate within that zhongding and to mobilize chi to get the job done.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So it's very much mental training as well. It's funny because, you know, I go and do a workout, I come out like way more relaxed than waking up in the morning. Sure. And my mind is as clear as, you know, I've been sitting for like 3 days.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And it's is it based on the way your way of doing it? Is it based on a lot less repetitions, physical repetitions, than an external thing? Like in I mean, like 3 sets of 12, or like people do, or something like that.
No, it's got nothing to do with any of that. Like, I mean, I'm a one rep wonder, right?
Sure.
Well, I do an insane amount of sets, but I'm a one rep wonder.
Right. So you the many sets on the inside of changing the body, but only one time to move the thing, or?
Yeah, one time, one rep, and then you have to calibrate and get your mind together and try to figure out how can I go deeper, and you do another set of one rep, you know?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I was trying to get at that it's a different way of working, right? It's like it's not the repetition of the weight, because that is, I forgot the term used for it, but putting people into that narrower field of movement, right?
Yep, absolutely. And so the interesting part about resistance is that there's a fundamental aspect of our psyche that of letting go that happens within these constraints when you have load on you. Like, you know, when, like, colloquially, when we use language, right? Mm-hmm. We say like, give me space, right?
Yeah.
The perception of space in the human mind is directly related to the consciously perceivable or perhaps unconsciously perceivable options. The more degrees of freedom or more options that you have available to you, it gets integrated into a perception by your body that gives you a physical perception of space, right? So with resistance, you directly deal with this, right? You know, like letting go is a very different thing standing versus when you have like 80 kilos on your chest and you're like, you know, you don't want to be crushed by it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a whole different range, like kind of quality that comes out of it. And interestingly enough, you know, like, I mean, a lot of BJJ guys who train really well, right, who basically train towards efficiency rather than brute force,
yes,
end up developing a lot of those mental qualities. I mean, their physical bodies are not organized the same way, But in terms of being open to the options and seeing the web of cause and effect emanating from the present moment, a lot of the BJJ guys actually, like high-level BJJ guys, already get it.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly operating within that environment where they are constricted in their movement because that's the goal, and they have to find the movement within. They have to find the space within to operate, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting.
But obviously doing it via a different mechanism, I assume, without the mechanism of Qi and zhongding, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I haven't personally met a BJJ guy who ordinarily would do it that way, but I mean, I know that there are some internalists who operate within the BJJ framework.
Yes.
Who do things that way, right?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
And who at least try to or strive to approach doing things that way. But ordinarily, it's not done that way. But the interesting part is that, if you listen to some of the things, I mean, I don't know if they're public or not, but I've heard accounts of the BJJ process being described by, I think it might have been Helio Gracie or someone like that, or it might be Rickson Gracie, or maybe both, right?
There's a lot
Where
of
they're talking about
one of them.
one of them, or both of them,
Yeah.
who are talking about like the inner conditions, the interoceptive conditions of functioning as a BJJ creature.
Yeah.
That has a lot of parallels with some of the conditions that we have in the internal work. So I'm not saying that they're mobilizing Qi per se, conscious at the very least, because they haven't, maybe they have, like, I mean, I can't say for sure, but most likely they haven't developed a dantian like you do in the internal arts.
Yes.
But there are a lot of commonalities in how they approach it, like how they approach movement and power.
Sure. So what do you think a dantian is in the internal martial arts?
So in the internal martial arts, the dantian is, the best way to explain it is that it's just like zhongding, right?
Yeah.
It occupies a certain niche within the overall picture.
Right.
What it may physically represent will be different depending on the actual technical modality that you're training.
Okay. So give us an early modality that would involve dantian.
So the earlier modality of involving the dantian, something that people who also do a lot of external work, especially with like mace work,
sure,
and things like that develop, which is an integration of your limbs and the rest of your body through what they would call your hara or your center, lower center, right?
Yeah.
So everything got strung up together to your center in some way that you can swing these massive loads around and deal with massive torques while still maintaining your balance and posture.
Okay. Yeah.
That integration point where everything stretches into or elastically connects to, and where all the movement originates from, is the niche term that is used for the idea of the dantian.
Okay.
In my experience.
Sure.
Right. And, it starts off very physically, obviously. And as you develop, it becomes more than just a physical, it becomes more energetic. But it's like, I mean, I've actually met people who actually have an energetic dantian, but not a physical dantian.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I certainly have as well. Yeah.
So, so it's, I mean, so dantian is not a thing. It's just basically, it's really a concept within the overall framework of what you're doing that occupies a certain niche within the overall architecture of how you're operating.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay. So if someone were to, so could you develop these arts without such a thing? Tai Chi, for example.
Well, it depends on what Tai Chi is, right? Like if you're going back to what the founders handed over to us, absolutely not.
Sure.
But if you're following one of these lineage holders or one of these modern day sages who sage speak all the time, they have no dantian, so whatever the fuck that they make it out to be, right?
Sure. I mean, there's the debate, isn't there? Like, what is Tai Chi? Say Tai Chi as an example. What is it? Is it what it was originally, or is it what most people practice now, or do you define it by what the lineage holders now are doing? Do you know what I mean? Like, because things evolve, change. It's hard to say where or what something is.
Yeah, I mean, Tai Chi is a great many number of things, a great many number of people today, and there are a lot of people doing it, right?
Yeah.
And even back in the day, what Tai Chi really is at a granular level differed from teacher to teacher at whatever the stage of their progress that they were in their lives, right?
Yes.
So it's not a new phenomena, but at least they were in the right ballpark within this umbrella where they would agree on the overall architecture of things, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Where things are, like what's the role of the zhongding, what is the role of the dantian, what is the role of qi, right?
Sure.
But nowadays, even lineage holders included, not everybody, but obviously some, right? It doesn't have that overall architecture, right? It's like a jumbled mess that gets distorted on a daily basis, right? That is,
Sure.
so this is basically what I'm trying to offer a counterpoint to every opportunity I get, because I owe it to the people who handed these arts down to us to at least stay within the ballpark, right? I mean, I'm not someone with a Highlander syndrome where, I basically say like my way is the only way, right? I mean, there can be only one, right? It's certainly not that. I mean, there's even back in the day when you look at how they have spoken and what they have said, and you look at their movement, some of the luminaries, they were doing slightly different things. But it was within that overall architecture. It all had that rough shape, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It wasn't something else altogether, right?
Sure. And what was the variation? The variation, I guess, from the outside was just because their internal mechanisms or conditions caused a slightly different expression on the outside.
So yes, it does cause a different expression on the outside, but it stems from the inner harmonies, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The proportions of the inner harmonies and the components that are unlocked and used within these inner harmonies are not necessarily identical.
Of course. Yes. Yeah.
But they're within the same ballpark in terms of operation, in terms of the role of the zhongding, role of the dantian, the role of letting go, the role of qi. Right?
Sure.
Those there is no argument about. They all agree on that.
It's not the case now.
It's not the case now.
No, definitely not. No.
Well, apparently these days, if you really want internal power, you need to wear sandals because it's sandal power, and it all comes through the spine, right?
Come through what?
Apparently, it all comes from the spine, right? And the funny part is that it's not untrue, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the chi does adhere to the spine. It's a very real thing. But that is once you have a dantian and once you have qi.
Sure.
If you don't have dantian and if you don't have qi, what exactly adheres to the spine?
Yeah, so nowadays power from the spine gets translated as sort of curving it and releasing it or something often, doesn't it? Or waving.
Yeah, that's twisting or some shit like that, like, I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, like,
yeah. I mean, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but the spine's not actually that strong. Like as a physical mechanism, they're not great joints. They're not any chiropractor.
No, it's not. Actually, you know what? Like, this is the reason why not any, but not all, but most competitive powerlifters or bodybuilders, right? When they get to the upper levels of their potential capacity,
yes,
they end up fucking up their spine. Like, like there are like legendary bodybuilders who, like, I forget this guy's name, like after some 30-something spinal surgeries, the doctor said, like, fuck it, no more. We're not doing that.
You could have set that up before the 30th spine surgery. Just to be
I mean, it may not be 30, it might be 16, but still, it was a high number, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you could ever be in a position to define your internal skill by how many surgeries you've had.
I think I told you before, I went to check out a Bagua giant school that was very well known. And when I got there, I sat in maybe a cafe with some of the disciples of the lineage holder of the system, and they were all sat around comparing the scars on their knees from the surgeries they'd had from circle walking the way they did, which was very long and low, like you see in wushu competitions. And they were all comparing.
Right.
They had like 4 scars, 3 scars on their knees, and they didn't see anything wrong with that at all, like nothing. And I looked at my knees, which are unscarred, and thought, do you know what? I think I'll go train somewhere else, actually. I think I'll give this a miss.
You would think that for any person with a bit of common sense, this would be like telling signs of to, like, run away.
If one person needs a knee operation, fair enough. But if all of you, then it's
that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a badge of honor. It's not like a rite of passage. You know
Sure.
what I mean?
Well, it seemed to be that way. Yeah. That was a lineage holder. That was a lineage holder, direct lineage holder as well.
I mean, my experience is completely different, right? So, I mean, I know that we weren't talking a lot at the time, but, sort of around, like, sort of, like when I went through my calamity in 2018, my spine completely deteriorated, right?
Your
And,
spine did.
yeah, my spine completely deteriorated. Like, it lost its ability to maintain integrity, right?
Yeah.
So much so that, like, I couldn't sit up, I couldn't stand, I couldn't even sleep, right?
Yes.
So there's tons of pain, and I used to get cortisol injections, and I went to like 2.5 spinal surgeons. I say 2.5 because one of them was like a traditional healer, right?
Right. I
And
think you say it was a kid or something. Yeah.
and all of them, right,
Yeah.
were basically suggesting that I take spinal surgery and like fuse some of the vertebrae, and they're
Oh,
like, it's not like you're moving anyway, so you don't need that,
cool.
right? So anyway, the point is that I'm standing today
Yes.
and walking and doing all kinds of weird stuff today because of the internal practice, right?
Yep.
Like after Adam very, very subtly tricked me into practicing again by asking me very specific technical questions where I had to practice to be able to have some way to like intelligently talk to him about it, right?
Yes.
Because I had by this point like given up on the body, right?
Yes.
So once I got back into it, like in about 6 months, the spine was perfectly fine. Like so much so that one of the spinal surgeons actually made me take multiple MRIs because he couldn't believe that how this is possible because he was like, "This is not possible," right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
He wanted to prove me wrong, and he's like, "No, I'm sure it is still deteriorating. Let's take an MRI. Let's take another one, right?"
And
But
what
this is
fixed
the
it?
thing. This is um letting go and zhongding basically, and
Right.
chi
Okay.
and surrender, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, all the bread and butter of internal practice, really. Like it's not any one specific thing I did. It's just how I was relating to the world and how I was moving with it, right?
So when you do you equate the damage to the spine with maybe linked to that phrase of obviously the spirit rising up the back as your spirit
No,
collapsed to the
no.
spine or something simpler than that?
So I mean, I don't know for sure, right? But the correlation that I saw, that I remember and I recognize is that the more my sense of self,
Yeah.
of who I knew myself to be, was deteriorating based on the insecurity and the fear and the doubt that I had about who I was directly correlated to the deterioration of the spine.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well.
Like the less I knew who I was and the less I had any sense of self-worth, the more deterioration there was in the spine.
Right.
And through surrender, like stepping away from the need for that in the first place, integrated everything together under a new normal in a way.
Sure. Yeah, I
So,
get it. That,
so
that's similar to when I've seen people who've had on a lesser scale than obviously what you're talking about with what happened to you back in 2018, right? I think
yeah,
I've seen people that have had like high flying jobs or really important positions or whatever in companies and then lost their job like overnight, like some financial problem. And then their spine just collapsed. It was like when their identity of their profession was gone. They
yeah,
never had any back problems, just boom, just back destroyed.
yeah. I mean, I can certainly relate to that. I mean, like there was a time when I didn't want to like be seen by any living thing, let alone a human being.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that's how bad it was. So, and I couldn't get up, stand, sleep, anything. Right. That was kind of like the law of the law in a way. Right. And I used to cry for hours because I was like, God doesn't love me. It's like, I'm not worth shit because even God doesn't love me anymore. You know what I mean? So
Sure. Okay.
but yeah, the spine thing was very much associated with that. And once I started to get out of it and started to start moving around with the new mental outlook of looking at things, right? Yeah, it just basically got integrated back together, and like it's been great.
Okay, good. No problems at all there now.
No, at all, not at all, actually. So at the moment, like for the last sort of 2 years or something, what I've been working on is like letting all the kinks out in the neuromuscular system that is twisting the spine,
Sure. Yeah.
which all have to do with sit up here, right?
Sure. Okay.
So yeah, I'm actually getting less kinky and less twisted as time goes, and my spine is getting more organized, and my body is becoming more symmetrical and beautiful, obviously.
And less kinky.
Less kinky.
Yes.
I mean, what the hell, you know? What's the fairness in that?
So, do you think that this way you see your so Tai Chi or well, internal arts in general? Do you feel it's more useful this direction you're taking it with regards to development rather than killing people? Do you want to kill people?
This is exactly what I mean. Like, you know, I mean, even before going there, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, I've been through a few interesting events. Like, you know, when I basically crashed my bike in Thailand in 2011 or whatever it was,
Yes.
right? And had a concussion and lost my sense of balance, right?
Yeah. I remember because
maintaining.
You were too frightened to get on a bike when I met you. So you used to.
Yeah, right.
Right. I have to
That's
know.
right.
I was too polite to say at the time, you were the worst passenger ever because you couldn't sit still. You were pointing at this and pointing at that. You nearly killed us several times when you were on the back of my bike.
Well, I'm glad we survived.
Yeah, me too.
And so yeah, like so basically coming out of it, I had no sense of balance. So the only way I knew how to maintain my balance and be able to stand up and eventually learn to walk properly and stuff like that was basically I was basically relying on the 13 structural integration points of Ilikchuan from Master Sam's tradition to remain within that, because I didn't have a sense of balance, which was innate. So I'm like, okay, if I maintain these conditions, I know I'm not going to fall over, right?
Sure. Okay.
So
yeah.
even before the high level practice stuff, maintaining the physical constraints helped me a lot recovering from that injury. So that is more powerful than, you know, like imposing myself on another human being and, you know, throwing them 20 meters or whatever the fuck. Who gives a shit, really? I mean, you know, you run them over with a car if you really want to do that.
Sure. I don't know the 13. I don't know much about Lilik Chuan. Are they similar to sort of Tai Chi parameters, or are they different?
I mean, it's in the same architecture. Like, so basically, Ilikchuan neutral is the analog concept to zhongding in Tai Chuan.
Right. Okay.
And just like Yang Cheng Fu's, you know, 10 or 13 points, depending on how you count, of structural integration that he's published, like Ilikchuan has 13 points that you maintain as a scaffolding to discover what the Ilikchuan neutral is.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So do Ilikchuan practitioners develop zhongding in the same way then?
No, I mean, their zhongding is different, right? It's not the same as Tai Chi zhongding, but their neutral has the same architectural place within that system, within their mode of operation, to what Tai Chi Chuan practitioners have with zhongding.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because you've obviously touched hands with the two heads really of Ilikchuan, haven't you?
Yeah. So Master Sam and Sifu Jimmy do things differently, right? And especially with Sifu Jimmy, everything is constantly in flux because he keeps on improving on a day-to-day basis, right?
Sure.
So his zhongding keeps on refining and refining and refining. But yeah, it's like their approach, that inner approach is different.
Yeah.
But the external framework is still the same.
Is it? Okay. All right then. Yeah. Yeah. The only Ilikchuan I've had is a lesson off you, I think. That's it.
All right. Okay. Well, then that's not it. Whatever it was.
Right.
No, this is the other thing, right? Like,
yeah,
the internal practice is very liberating because, like, my zhongding and harmonies change every bloody time I train now. So what I said today to anybody and what I believed in myself is either an incomplete truth or an outright lie tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So you're liberated from the notion of knowledge. At the end of the day, I know nothing, right? Like, if you ask me something, I'll be able to like concoct something, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like knowledge in any sense of the word. It's just basically I'm putting things together and expressing something to you. but that doesn't not necessarily reflect my worldview tomorrow, and certainly not the day after, right?
Are there not some core, say, parameters or harmonies that have remained the same throughout of this, or have they all changed?
The architecture remains,
Sure.
and the harmonies change quite a lot. The
Okay.
oral architecture remains.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Does this
I mean, the
manifest?
changes in the oral architecture is slow, right? I mean,
Sure.
oral architecture changes very slowly,
Mm-hmm.
but the internal parameters and harmonies change on a bloody day-to-day basis, really.
Sure. Okay. Well, that makes it difficult, maybe to. I guess that makes it a hard thing to teach, right? So we're making
Well,
it.
that's why I'm not a teacher.
Right. Okay. Sure. I would imagine it would.
That's why I leave it to more qualified people.
Oh, I don't know about that. It is, yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, maybe my point being, maybe not specifically person to person, but maybe this is kind of a part of the reason why these things have disappeared so much, rather than secrecy or something. Because maybe it's just really difficult to pass on if something's shifting day by day by day.
I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, you can see it if you really look into, like, Lifetime or some of the luminaries in the art, and you see people who train with them at an earlier stage.
Yes.
Their view of the art is completely different to someone who like trained with them, like, the week before they died or something.
Sure. Yeah, totally. And at what stage does a teacher write down which are the core harmonies? Like they must, hang on 1 second. It just rises like an ice box in here. Turn off the temperature thing. Yeah. So what stage do they I guess when they write it down, say Yang Cheng Fu's key principles that he writes down, I guess the question is, does he write down what harmonies he's using at the time, or what harmonies people should start with, or what harmonies are the constants? I mean, do you have an opinion?
This is the thing. I would say based on his actual writing, I would say those are the harmonies that he's seen to be more static throughout
Sure.
the development that he can remember.
Yeah.
And again, what doesn't help is that the way I train is the way that my favorite teacher approached it, was to constantly keep on refining how you let go, how you surrender, how you offer yourself to the divine, right?
Yes.
So I'm not really thinking about harmonies at all. I'm really thinking about the architecture of letting go, or the structure of letting go. So unless someone asks me, like we touch hands and basically I can feel something out of place, I'm not even thinking about harmonies.
Sure. But there must have been a stage where you were, right? There must have been a stage where you were, and because they're kind of taken care of, you've moved on.
That's right. I mean, like there was of course I started with the Li Chun 13 points and Yang Cheng Fu's 10 to 13 points, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But once it got into the more interoceptive aspect of letting go, and what you maintain when you let go and what is left when you let go, those things are no longer things I even think about, right?
Yeah, I get it.
When I'm working with a friend, and if he's doing something, and if I can see something is out of place, depending on where I'm at on the day, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So I can point out at some harmonies that may be a little bit off, right?
Sure.
But it is not something that I would like write down, for example. I mean, I know that a lot of friends actually have asked me to write these things down at every stage. I don't think it's practical, man. Like, I mean, every training session, my zhongding changes, and I train like 3-4 times a day.
Right.
So it's just gonna happen.
It would be a mad scrolling that just went on for pages and pages.
Exactly. I'm sorry, Rob.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this is the thing with the great unknowing, right? Like in the sense that when your mind is free of knowledge, right, language and ideas and concepts that we call knowledge becomes things that are used in an instant for a particular purpose. Sure. There's no use for it beyond that, right? Mm-hmm. So when someone else asks the same question, if the conditions they're presenting is different, where they're coming from is different, right? How it will be described will be different, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely something I've seen from the people I've learned from as well, where I've asked something and then somebody else has asked something on a similar matter, and there's been a different response, almost contradictory in the extreme, like almost the exact opposite within 20 minutes of the question being answered.
And the beauty of this is, from a student perspective, is that people always get harped on the Highlander syndrome again, like, which version is true, right?
Yes.
But the thing is, right, when you have descriptions from multiple facets of the same thing, within the intersection of the view from all these facets, where those views from those facets are true,
Mm-hmm.
is where the truth lies, right? So
Yeah.
having different interpretations, having different descriptions makes it much easier to find the truth if you can get your mind to accept that there must be this one true state where all this perspective dependent knowledge arises from.
Yeah, sure.
But most people, they can't let go of that idea that I need security by having that one right thing, right?
I've seen that. I've seen that from teachers that I've seen their writings, not leaning on shoulders or head, like how people, but watching people writing something or getting hung up on a principle, and then I don't see them for a while, then I see some more of their writings 5 years later, and it's exactly the same, or another 5 years later, it's exactly the same, and I can see they're kind of stuck. And if I look back to even what I said a short while ago, it's definitely developed beyond there. And I don't understand how people get fixated on this sort of one concept. And then eventually that concept becomes what they do. Like it's like one principle becomes their identity within these arts or something. And I wouldn't want to practice an art that caused me to become stuck that way, really. Well, it's not an art.
Exactly right. And, like we build our own prisons, right? And the knowledge of what we consider knowledge becomes our prison, because now instead of seeing things for what they are and refining our experience of it, we become these slaves to this worldview that we are going to operate within, right? So it just creates bad feeling, right? So, and
it also creates bad feeling as well, not just
it does, yeah,
because then you have to
like
defend that idea.
It sounds horrible, really. No, it's interesting because very early on my training, like I asked Jimmy, like, Sifu, can we start writing down some of these things, like sort of we can systematize this a bit. And he laughed at me and said, I'm changing every day, so how can I create a system of it? This is a living art.
Cool.
And then he said, like, you want to know what Ilichuan is? It's me, right?
Okay.
Like, and it's so true. Like, it's funny because some of Jimmy's students get really bent out of shape when I say Ilichuan is Jimmy, or Wuji Ilichuan is Jimmy, right? They get bent out of shape because like, oh yeah, I'm like a level 8 or 9 and like 6 or whatever the fuck it is. And like, I know this form, that form, blah, 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 blah. It's like, doesn't matter. Those things are not the art.
Sure.
The art is the man who created the fucking thing and constantly refining, right?
Yes.
So, but like that's something that I learned very early on, very directly, because Jimmy would, he would refuse to systematize things because he's like, then he stops being a living art. And like, in other words, right, he's basically saying like, don't basically lock me in a box because you want fucking security, right?
Cool. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
And he would basically say like, look, I would show you what I'm doing 100 times, 1,000 times, 600 times until you get it. That's how we learn, not by reading something that I write. You know what I mean?
But then you do have there is that challenge there, isn't it? That I guess as somebody like him or somebody teaching something, it's the divide between taking one person and training them to get to the stage where they're a living art, or trying to preserve the system full stop. Because if a system is too fluid, too organic, it's very hard for it to survive.
That's right,
really, isn't it? Because it's only really going to survive if the person you taught has reached a stage where they're also a living art. And maybe there's a decision you have to make where it's like, maybe I have to settle on something less in order to standardize it for a little while.
I think, to be fair, if you look at historical figures, I think Don Hai Chuan did a good job, right? Like, he produced a lot of living art kind of students, right? Yes. But each of them do it differently, but, they all are that living art kind of thing. So,
and yet that art's almost dead.
Sorry?
And yet that art's almost dead now. So
that's true. So obviously all of his students didn't quite get something from Dong Hai Chuan where they could like replicate it in their students.
I would say it's much harder to find someone in Bagua that really has got it, or has the Bagua really the living art, I guess, as you described it, compared to Tai Chi, and it's hard in Tai Chi.
Absolutely, I fully agree. And I mean, it's. I think the problem is like you said, right? Tai Chi at least has some structure, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and Bagua, for the most part, in terms of the literary tradition, for example, right? There's
Yeah.
really like very little.
Yes, I think also as well, having being a practitioner of both arts or fumbling around in them, I think Tai Chi, at least you can kind of, there's a logical basis to its foundation
Yeah,
exercises. You know what I mean? Whereas the
yeah,
foundation exercise for Bhagavad is circle walking, which is such a bizarre foundation practice that I think people kind of, on the whole, get confused and stumble on the first block. It's like before you
yeah.
worry about anything else. And I
Very
understand,
well
like,
said.
I get it. Like, what an odd practice to begin with.
Yeah, this is something this is why Michael Phillips like says Bagua is like a PhD level art, right? It's like it's not something that you take on as a beginner. It's something that you take on once you're well versed in one or more internal systems. It's sort of like the further refinement. And actually, interesting enough, right? Yang Ban Hao transmitted his own version of Bagua
Yeah.
as complementary to Taiji Chuan because he obviously found that whatever the emphasis that's there within that certain stream of Bagua practices was actually required to reach higher levels of Tai Chi from his perspective.
Right. Okay. How
So,
preserved is that? That's the question.
um, yeah, I've met like one person who had it,
Sure.
and I've met like two people who knew the framework, but that's about it. And like one of them didn't practice it, and the other guy practiced it very much like an external style. So
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And that's how things get lost.
that's right. And then you have dickheads who basically make shit up to justify their incompetence, which doesn't help.
So, so I've watched you try to explain the your take on Gongli. Like if it's okay for me to call it that. Just I think that's what most people would categorize it as.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe it's an unsatisfactory name for it because it kind of implies sort of clumsy strength building, but you know what I mean, like the strengthening process, using
yeah,
resistance to a certain degree to
yeah.
teach these internal parameters. But I've seen you try to explain it, and I don't know. Like here, I think you've explained it very satisfactory. I mean, it's clear to me. I think the process, the logic behind it, but it's interesting to see how much resistance you get from people when you try to explain this to them. Why do
Uh,
you think that is? Because it's not. There's like a logical kickback with something. Do you know what I mean? When you present an idea and it sounds so weird, people go, "Oh, fuck off." I get that, but sometimes you present an idea, or people in general, and there's like an illogical kickback to it. It's like something in them subconsciously can't accept it, let alone doesn't want to accept it. And I've seen that around this.
and I tend to see that a lot as sour grapes in a way that
Okay.
like I mean, if you go like I mean, the way I was passed down some of these things from some traditions, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't use the term gong li to describe the actual internal work, the internal resistance work they do. They use the term gong li to describe the work that you do prior to taking on internal work,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Sorry, just putting a name on it for now. But yeah.
Yeah. The internal work they refer to as yi. They don't really change it or anything, right?
Okay.
And now the thing is that the fundamental problem I find is that to the average person who knows only the over specialized conventional way of generating power, right? Describing how the Yi Jing process changes how you operate
Yes.
is completely alien. Like they don't have a reference for it. They like a lot of people find it difficult to understand it. And the problem is it's such a fundamental thing that there's a lot of resistance that arises to it. They said people don't want to admit that they don't know. Like like if it's such a fundamental thing, like how much of a numpty do I have to be if I don't get it? Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so they resort to if I don't get it, it doesn't exist. Right.
So it's almost like an embarrassment thing, or in this way, not wanting to admit it.
Yeah. I mean, you see this in not in the internal world, right? Like, I mean, a lot of practitioners who have spent a lot of time and invested in these things, right?
Yes.
It generally operate under the principle that if I can't envision it in my mind and appreciate it in some way, shape, or form, it cannot be real because they don't have the courage and security within their own self-worth to accept that there could be something that they are completely unaware of in existence that is possible.
Yeah, totally. And this was always my approach with it, that several times in my practice I encountered teachers that did something or said something that I just couldn't understand, and even a part of my brain was like, yeah, I'm not sure about this. So my logic was,
Yep.
I'll give it 6 months. I'll do it alongside, because if it is real, then the outcome that is produced seems worth having. The outcome seems worth it. So therefore, I'll dedicate 6 months to it alongside my other training and see if it comes to any fruition. And generally, that was how I made a choice. And I kept a totally open mind. And after 6 months, I could usually know whether this was leading somewhere or not leading somewhere else. That was always my approach.
Like, I mean, for me, it takes a lot longer. Like, for example, I remember I was bitching to you about like how like, you know, how Wang Shengzai was right and I fucking hate Yi Chuan, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, that took like what, like, you know, 16 years to get there.
Why
I
do
don't know.
why do you hate each one?
No, I mean, I don't hate it. I was just basically saying that I don't like the way that most modern practitioners, Yi Chuan, operate. Like, they're very stiff. But I mean, if you look at someone like Sam Tam, right, he's very fluid. There's a lot of chi involved. It's very different, right?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, a lot of Yi Chuan practitioners are stiff as fuck, right? You know what I mean? Like, you know, so you look at Sam Tam's movement and, you know, he comes from a Yi Chuan background and, you know, he's doing it right because, you know, you can see all the right qualities in him, right? But then you see some of those guys like, oh, I learned from the Yao brothers and he moves like a fucking robot. And I'm like, that shit can't be right.
Right.
You
Okay.
know?
Yeah.
But
I did some each one.
lately, sorry?
I did some each one, but it was of the I just went to have a look for a short while, and it was of the robotic. It was standing in
Right.
Zhong. It was standing in Zhong with no principles, and then you hit each other with boxing gloves. I didn't I didn't
Oh,
really
yeah.
understand.
It's a little bit different, right? Yeah.
It kept me
So,
busy for a few weeks, whatever.
yeah. So I really don't resonate with that particular interpretation of each one, right?
Sure.
But the more I spend time with these things, especially lately, the more I find myself working with static postures, whether they are loaded or unloaded, right? Like weighted or not, or whether it's in a pool or not, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I tend to spend more time in what can be seen as static postures, and I'm beginning to appreciate a lot of writings and a lot of the bitching by Wang Zhengfei at the time.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. He was quite outspoken.
Yeah, and I'm like, damn, like, you know, he was onto something.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I get it. 1 second.
So, yeah, it only took 16 years, but, you know, could be worse.
Well, it probably took him longer. I mean, he didn't develop each one right at the beginning of his journey, right?
Yeah, which is true, right? Which is true. And, you know, like, he was one of those guys. I really resonate with him in a way. Like, he was basically one of those guys who seemed to go like, okay, everything is arising from a smaller subset of principles. So let's get the principles right, and everything else will fall into place. If you get the principles right.
Which is very philosophical Taoist anyway, with all of the myriad things being born out of a central point, right? Which is kind of the core philosophy the internal arts adopted, as far as I could see.
Exactly. I mean, you know, this is why I tend to think that, you know, our existence might be some type of computational gimmick, for the simple reason that if I was programming a system like this, these are some of the optimizations that I would take
Sure.
to reduce the computational complexity, right? So
Sure.
who knows?
Yeah, very true.
So I don't know much about God, but I know that God was a great programmer.
So what is what was so my view then is that there has sometimes, I guess sometimes caused disagreement from people is I believe that an internal art is not really an internal art by that categorization if it doesn't include or at least run parallel to the principles of the I Ching Ching. I can't think of an internal art that I know, including everything from Gong through to Qigong, through to Tai Chi Bagua, and Xingyi, even really, and others I've seen, and yoga, really, the body on the side of it. They all kind of classify it. So maybe you could explain how you see the principles of the I Ching Ching, because the sinew changing, sorry, for people who don't know what that phrase is, I apologize. What do you think the key principles of the I Ching Ching process are? Or is it a practice?
So the interesting part about this, like one of my teachers, he used to translate it as not sinew changing, but he was very specific. He was like changing the qualities of the muscles to closely match those of the sinews so that they can work together as one. Sure. It's a mouthful, but that was his translation, and that made a lot of sense to me, and it still does.
Yeah.
And when you look at the actual use of it, right, like basically Zhong is not a state of complete muscle relaxation, right? It's a state that creates the dynamic tension, elastic tension, and rila, which is basically largely created by activating muscle fibers in the muscles to a very partial degree so that they become more like the sinews, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, that is the I Ching Ching process, right? So whether you use the elasticity primarily or you use the elasticity and the viscosity of the body, like Taoist arts versus like the Shaolin arts, for example, right? So it doesn't matter because fundamentally it's the same I Ching Ching process. So I fully agree that if on a physical level, if you're not operating in a way to maximize the I Ching Ching principles in your body with whatever that you do the way you do it, I wouldn't classify it personally as an internal art.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. So how do you mobilize those things though? What is the mechanism behind it? Because you say release, but there must be, or maybe it doesn't matter to you. Maybe it doesn't matter. But what is the thing that causes the outcome of release to be this transformation of the sinews and the tissues?
So this is exactly right. So this is where
or does it not matter? Like, you can say it doesn't matter.
No, I mean it's actually fairly simple, really. Like okay. So to me, the genius within the Chinese systems is that they figured out how to release your body in a particular way where there's a causality chain that creates right conditions. So you release something to experience something else release as a result.
Yeah.
And you experience it without any temporal distortion. It's immediate. And if that is working, then there are a whole set of conditions that are confirmatory that fall into place.
Cool. Okay.
So within that framework, it creates the right conditions, in my experience, within those specific things. So this is why I generally train with the tradition that I've actually spent a lot of time in terms of training, which has a sequence of release formulas, so to speak, that create the right kind of letting go,
sure,
both mentally and physically, to create the right physical conditions rather than worrying about the physical conditions themselves. The physical conditions do exist as confirmatory markers to know that you're in the right wheelhouse.
Sure. Okay. And what would be one clear confirmatory marker for people? Because that's what they're going to ask.
So it depends on the release formula, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've actually shared with my mom for health reasons, and this is something that you do at the ground level.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of health benefits in my own personal experience and the experience of people I've shared it with. It's very simple, right? It's basically, you have your ischial tuberosity, which is your seed bones, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you let go in such a way to maximize your experience of a hollowness emanating from your tailbone, from your seed bones, right? Ischial tuberosity.
Yeah.
In such a way that the musculature in your arch releases as if it was directly coupled with ischial tuberosity. So you're not experiencing any progressive movement down the legs or anything like that. So in your mind, it's basically say like you merge the ischial tuberosity with the top of the arch, the musculature. And when you follow the axial tuberosity, you experience release in the musculature of the arch. And what it does is, and as in terms of confirmatory markers, it essentially does this, right? Like, so basically, if I do that, right, and once it happens, your spine straightens out like this, and you basically go into this, right?
Sure.
So this is not what they're trying to do, but this is a confirmatory marker.
Sure.
And there's a lot of mental transformation that happens during the process as well. So when you have the shape arise within the right constraints, you know that you're doing, your courses are correct.
Sure. Yeah.
But you're not recreating the effects, but you're engaging yourself, you're letting go in such a way that the perception of the courses happening is maximized.
It reminds me in a way of the release points in Taiji that are used in order to generate the conditions for Yu Jian and stuff like this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
It's the same principle, exactly the same principle.
Sure. Yeah.
So
it makes it a far more interesting art than turn your waist maintain center line.
And the thing is that it also, because of the confirmatory elements are built in, when the shape and the power you generate is confirmatory of the right process,
yes,
you know when you're wrong, right?
Yeah, sure, yeah. If you fall flat on your face,
you don't have to run around believing. Yeah, you don't have to run around believing you're doing the right thing, if either it happens or not, right? Sure. So this is kind of partially, if not completely, the reason why you basically have these stories of people standing for like 2 years. Because generally, my teacher, for example, never told me the confirmatory conditions, because he said, if I tell you, you're going to mimic it, whether you like it or not, right? Sure. So he would basically make me send him videos and he'd say, okay, that's right. This is not correct. It's not moving in the right way because you're doing X, Y, and Z. So let that go, kind of thing, right?
Sure, yes.
And then once you reach the right shape, he'll be like, okay, yeah, you got it. Okay, now you can discard that. We're moving to the next one, kind of thing, right? So
sure, yeah, totally. Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe just to sort of conclude this and wrap it up, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you about, if that was all right. And not something that will get you in trouble. So it's all right.
That's very rare.
I saw there's a video of you doing oh, maybe would it be all right if I cut some of your little clips of your videos and put it into this and then chuck it into this podcast, or I get
go for it. Like, I mean, whatever makes sense, go for it. Yeah.
Because I keep talking about things you're doing. Maybe it's easier I just put them in so people can see, basically. But there's a video of you. There was a video I was very fascinated by. Well, first of all, for the location, you were doing a form in a coffee shop. There's a video of you.
Yeah.
You know that one? Yeah, you know the one I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like you were in a queue.
I do that a lot, but I know the particular one you might be referring to.
Yeah, you were waiting in a queue for a coffee, I assume, or something.
Yeah,
you were doing Tai Chi video. My first thought was that must be a right pain in the ass for the customers. But after that, I thought it was one of the clearest examples I've seen you demonstrate, or many people demonstrate really, of the inner conditions producing the outside shape of what was going on. So I kind of know what you're doing, but maybe you could explore. Obviously, you're using something to release, to create the conditions to move through the sequence, right? So far, so good.
Yep.
So why is the form produced in that shape, for example? Are you changing the conditions one at a time, or does each postural outcome create a new condition?
So this is a really interesting one, right? So this is something that
I know I'm prying now.
No, not at all. Like, this is something that I have been unable to share with a lot of people, right? Is that, in this oral tradition of this particular family branch, right?
Yeah.
The way they describe it is that the forms, and they're referring to only a subset of the forms, not all forms, right? They say the forms are the way they are because we are built the way we are, right?
Yep.
So the general idea is that there is a generative principle for each one of these so-called primordial forms, right? And when you're using the generative principle, when you're releasing according to that general principle, depending on where you start, a sequence of movements come out.
Okay, yeah.
And then it runs its course and then it starts repeating again.
Right. Okay.
So
Yeah.
what I'm doing there is that I'm constantly running the same generative principle that gives rise to that entire sequence of movements.
Sure. Are you allowed to discuss what that is, or is this a inner door thing?
I'm allowed to discuss what it is, but I don't know if that will help that much.
Oh, I just
Like,
for interest for people, but if you don't want to, it's okay. It's fine.
no, I can, right? But it might not make much sense because so that particular one I was doing from memory was, I think, was the heaven frame or the frame neutral version, whichever that was.
Yeah.
So so the frame neutral version is easy. I'm just swinging, right?
Right. Okay.
But for the heaven frame, what you're doing is you're dispersing your yi on the plane
Yeah.
of. It's not quite the Kunlun point, but it was below. It's a little bit below that.
Sure.
And like if you do it at the Kunlun point, what you get is very similar to Bagua.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Can you
So
how you describe the Kunlun point? How you would define it?
so the way I would define the Kunlun point is that, I mean, people like, basically people say it's like, 3 or 4, like, I mean, in Aboriginal traditions, some traditions, they use the word individuation point, right? Like they say it's like 3 or 4 like feet above the crown. But the way I was taught that point was that it's like the God point, right? It's like if you can, okay, so to take a step back, right? Like people have an innate sense of where their presence is, right? Like say, for example, if I ask you to point a finger at you, right? You might do this, right? And
Yeah.
some people point, right? And sometimes Japanese people like point here, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So there's this innate sense of your presence within the body. Like if you ask them, like, are you here? They'll say no. Like they may not sometimes know where it is, but they might say, like, are you here? But no, that doesn't sound right. But are you here? Yeah, I could say I'm here, right? That kind of thing, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So the process is that instead of your presence being within the body where it is, right, you situate your presence above the crown as high as you can situate it, right?
Yeah.
Until the separation between you and not you disappears.
Okay.
So that's
Yes. Yep.
kind of the definition that I was given for the Kunlun point, is that it's the point where when you situate your presence there, the separation disappears. Everything becomes one thing.
Sure. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the heaven frame is actually not quite there. It's a little bit below that. But yeah. So it's interesting that if you situate your presence all the way up there, what you get is very similar to the Bagua work that Yang Banhao passed on, which is really interesting.
Yes. That's quite different from raising your spine and spreading your back like a cobra.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, right?
It's a little different. It's a little different. Yeah.
Right. And like it's funny, right? Like I mean, the thing is that there's a lot of colloquial things in language
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense, right? Like when you do this, right? Like it looks very shifty, like you're constantly trying to exploit someone else.
Well, I feel uncomfortable. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? I mean, this is not what the art is about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I get it.
like, if you look at Paul Ackerman's work on the micro expressions of the face and reading emotional state based on micro expressions, like I think one of his PhD students, one of his research was really interesting, was that he found that it to be bidirectional, right?
Right.
So not only did the emotional state get reflected in micro expressions of the face, but electrically stimulating the facial muscles in that micro expression pattern would create that emotion in them. So it's a bidirectional street. So if you organize yourself to like operate like this constantly, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what do you think that happened to your personality and psyche over time?
I noticed that different alignments, different teachers set me up in different conditions, and some would make me very aggressive and very overt for sure, and very extroverted, which actually at that stage in my training wasn't the worst thing for me to bring me out of myself. But I can see how too much of that couldn't have been great.
Yeah, I mean, like shifty motherfuckers gravitating towards that structure that because that suits their personality is great, but don't make it like say that this is what Yang the Invincible passed on down the generations for the hoi polloi to practice, right? Like that's not what happened.
makes you look like you're trying to sort of trick kids into joining your pickpocketing gang or something in Elizabethan England.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly right. And like the funny thing is, like, I'm sure you're well aware of it, but there's a whole Chinese tradition of face reading or posture
Yeah.
reading, right?
Yeah.
And that's legit in my experience. That's fully solid.
Do you go as
So,
far as phrenology?
sorry,
Do you go as far as a phrenology, lumps on the head, or?
I'm not even sure what phrenology is.
Oh, it's when they would, isn't it when they would diagnose you from lumps and bumps on the head, and then they go, oh, you need to go to an asylum because you've got a bump on your head or something like that.
All right, no, I haven't quite come across that, but no, I've had some pretty profound things where like some people have pointed out the way I walk that you need to go you need to go easy on this mental proclivity because it is
Okay,
shifting your energy structure and twisting your body content.
sure, that's good diagnosis.
Like it's funny because one of the gentlemen, like it's so funny, he just said like I literally walked into the room and he says like you don't have to eat everything that you see outside because it's not going to go to waste. Don't worry.
Sure.
And I'm like, oh, fuck you, man. Because the problem is like growing up in a traditional household where like wasting food was like blasphemy, right?
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
it was like, oh, there are kids dying in God knows wherever without food, and you're wasting food. I'm like, my eating is not actually going to make them better,
Sure.
but you grow up with that kind of shit, and then it becomes like a part of your normal repertoire until you learn to put some distance between your acquired mind and your true self to the extent you can start seeing these things, like it's just
Yeah, totally. They're the kind of things I only tend to notice in myself when I go home or when I get back to my country, to the UK, not even to family home, but to my country. And then I start to think, does the country bring those back out in me, or do I just see it in all the people around me and it shows me how British I am? I can't figure out one or the other.
very good. I mean, like we are all slaves to our experience, right? Like, I mean, not even our experience of our like parents and grandparents and all this shit, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm better at putting some distance between my experience of myself and that, but I'm not perfect in any sense of the word. I mean, look at the way I'm dressed, for fuck's sake.
Well, I'm happy you made an effort for the chat for the podcast. Actually,
Well, you can't blame me for not taking it seriously enough, right?
I know, yeah, completely. And I feel underdressed. I've just got a t-shirt on.
I mean, I quite like your headgear. Actually, I would love to see you do a podcast in your beautiful headgear.
Yeah, actually, I'm not in my podcast studio. I'm in my. This is my lounge.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, just because I haven't got Wi-Fi. I didn't realize I've set up everything in the podcast studio, including we now have proper equipment and everything. And once again, I'm on a dodgy mic because I forgot to put Wi-Fi in the podcast studio, which is a bit of an oversight. That's quite important.
Fair enough.
I didn't realize till I turned on Zoom or tried to, then realized I couldn't actually speak to you. But never mind. So sorry about that.
No worries, man. It's all good. And yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to see when this comes out because I'm sure that a lot of people would love to see me like this. So
I'm sure they will. I'm sure the comments will be great. Well, I'll wrap it up there, Jerry. That was really good. Is there anything else you want to say? I think this has actually been. I think not to blow my own trumpet, but I think I managed to pry out of you some definitions to some of the things you talk about that might be helpful to people. I think so.
And I deny ever saying any of that if someone asks me.
Totally. And then, so is there anything else you want to add? Anything you want to conclude with? Or?
No. It's all good, man. I'm just gonna go to the bedroom now and just working on my turning trick skills.
You have to get out in the streets, mate. Get out in the streets.
I know, but I have to look more like a sex doll before I do that. So I got to work on that.
You need brighter lipstick, I think.
I know, right? I think it's this and this that is kind of like taking it off. I just need better quality lipstick.
Do you know, out of everything there, the most shocking thing is your vaping. What does that say about me? That's the most shocking bit.
Well, I mean, I could be drinking a coffee and you'll be equally shocked and horrified. So,
No, I'm far from pure. The amount of shit we got for the cigar smoking on the podcast with Adam, it would be as if I was injecting heroin, I would say, from the views people have.
No, it's like very funny because one of the most spiritual elevated people I used to know used to be a chain smoker, right? And
Yeah.
and someone who should know better denounced him at the very moment of mention because his view was that anyone who is spiritual elevator should not be smoking.
Well, the thing is, as well, is the problem is I also know who you're talking about, and I know that they have various negative habits themselves that I think would outweigh even a chain smoker. Not that I'm far from a chain smoker; it's the occasional cigar every now. But I think that person's habits are probably worse than a chain smoker's, to be perfectly honest. In some
Well,
way.
I mean, this is the thing, right? Like I used to perceive this as somewhat nefarious,
Yeah,
but a very smart person once has described to me, like, when people have their vices, they're so familiar with it, it doesn't seem like big things.
sure.
But when they see something in someone that they don't like in themselves or that they don't like in general, then it's such a big deal, right? Because
Yeah.
it is what it is, familiarity, right? So
Yeah, totally. And I think yeah, people just need to loosen up. And in many ways, one thing that's very impressive about yourself, and I mean this genuinely, I am impressed by it, is your ability to not be phased by what people think. It's amazing that I see people when you squabble with them online and they think you're upset, but I know you, Joey, and I know that that's not the case. Actually, not at all, as I think you're evidencing by standing here like a two-bit hooker the last couple of hours on this podcast.
hey. It's a two-bit hooker who's trying to make the life better by putting in effort. Okay,
Right.
and that's sexual for you. Thank you.
Totally. Whilst also discussing some very detailed and insightful aspects of internal training. The contrast is amazing.
Like I was actually thinking about, like, you may not see it, but I'm actually wearing a beautiful skirt and like lovely shimmering leggings.
Oh, are you?
So I was thinking about actually doing the form in
Right.
this outfit,
Okay.
but it's a bit dark outside, so I don't think I can get proper lighting. So I'll leave that to another day.
I think if you went outside now, you might get arrested, but
That's a valid point.
so maybe not. Well, thank you very much, Joey. Great to speak to you again.
Absolute pleasure as always, my friend. Take care and look forward to reading all the various and detailed judgments that we'll get online.
I'm gonna write some of my own, actually judging you under here. But yeah, sure. Now, I'll definitely catch up with you in person over the winter period as well at some stage.
Cool, sounds good. I mean,
in.
definitely January.
Say again?
I mean, the dates. The dates. You know where I'm going to be. So
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
love to have you there.
Sure. I'll catch you because I got a few months off as well for a change, which is weird. So yeah, I'll come find you.
Cool, that'll be awesome. I mean, like, if nothing else, I would help you waste that time in a little more entertaining way.
Totally. Yeah. We'll dress up together. All right, mate.
That sounds great.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.